I'm sitting here talking with Trevor Lea-Cox. He is an expert with years of experience. He doesn't like to refer to himself as an expert. I just saw his expressions. But he is definitely an expert in my view. Years of experience in all kinds of projects at very high level, medium level, low level. Just doing the work everywhere. Now, before we get into that, take me back to when you were about 10 years old.
All right.
Where did you live then, and what was life like?
Kai,
Yes.
As you can probably detect from my accent, I grew up in Africa, and not South Africa. A lot of people think that I'm South African. I actually grew up in Rhodesia, as it was then, now Zimbabwe. And at the age of 10, I was going to the local junior school, a little place called Whitestones.
So this is in a village or in a city?
I actually lived in a place called Bulawayo, which was a city, but it was interesting because it's not a city like London. I mean, when I grew up there wasn't a single building that was older than 100 years. Okay, so it was all relatively new. Okay, and very planned in many respects, and very unplanned in others. But I went to the local junior school, as I said, a school called Whitestones, or in Ndebele, which is the local language there, Machimshlopi. And I then went to a secondary school, which was a standard secondary school in Bulawayo. And really had a very rural life. Okay, lots of time in the bush.
Yes.
Not much time in an urban environment at all.
Any animals in the bush?
Oh, snakes, particularly snakes, which my mother hated.
Were you
Oh yeah.
attracted to snakes, or you were just scared?
Insects? No, I wasn't scared of them. No. But you had to know which ones to avoid.
Yeah.
But there was just lots and lots of interest out there. Lots of animals, particularly the antelope, the smaller animals, and birds. So I have a keen interest in birds.
You still
right from that time. Oh
you
yeah,
still
I
have?
love it. Bird watching is not a passion, but I enjoy it when I get the opportunity to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so as I said, it was a very rural upbringing. But at the end of my secondary school, I was destined to go to Cape Town to university to study civil engineering. But my parents said to me, would I like to go across to the UK to study?
Why were you destined to study civil engineering?
Largely because I was much better at maths than I was at anything else.
Okay.
All right. Especially languages.
Yes.
I'm pretty useless at that. But I...
Before you go to university,
Yes.
At that age, like say any time before university,
Yes.
did you have somebody who had a strong influence on your life in one way or another?
The only person who's really memorable in that was actually my mathematics teacher at about the age of, I would say, about 10, right? Who actually taught algebra using cakes and food of any type. But of course, for being a little boy, that really appealed. So I learned a lot about algebra at quite an early age, and I enjoyed it. And that probably was very formative.
Right.
But I was pretty active. Quite a lot of sport. I wouldn't call myself academic in any stretch of the imagination, but I did okay, and as a result, was eligible to go to university.
and you didn't go to South Africa University. You came to...
Yeah, I came to the UK. My parents are English, and they offered me the opportunity to come across to the UK. Well, I looked at the map, and the UK looked very close to the North Pole from where I was. So I looked at the different options, and I chose a university as far south as I could possibly get it, and that was Southampton.
All right.
So I went to Southampton University, and...
How old are you now?
I'm about 18 at this point.
18. And you went then alone, or with your parents? Or?
No, I came alone, because they were out in Africa.
Yeah.
And studied there, and studied engineering mathematics with a very strong bent towards mechanical and aeronautical engineering. And I got into rowing, so a passion that has stayed with me all my life is rowing, and still do it as often as I can, but it's now generally on a rowing machine rather than in a boat. And
wait, you generally do it in the machine or in the boat?
No, the trouble is, if you actually go into a boat, it's a big commitment, because you've got to be there.
Exactly,
because,
time, people.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas a rowing machine you can do any time of the day or night. which
So
is
they're
great.
convenient.
Yeah, that's right.
I imagine the rowing, in the canals. It's
I know,
beautiful.
but what's
fresh
wonderful
air.
about the UK is that you don't have to row on canals. You've got rivers.
Yeah.
And I live on near the Thames. So,
Yes. So you get to go out on the Thames too. You're not
Yeah,
just in
yeah,
the
yeah.
cellar on your rowing machine.
No, but most of it's on the rowing machine, I confess. Yeah, but I started rowing and enjoyed it so much that I wanted to stay on, and so I did a master's degree in operational research.
To stay on rowing.
Yeah, that's right.
I
But I'd also
didn't-
met a young lady at that stage who eventually became my wife.
All right, wonderful.
Yeah, but I went back.
Is she still your wife?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Over 40 years now. But after that, I went back to Rhodesia. I actually was called up, and I worked for Rhodesia Railways at that stage, and I was called up into the Rhodesian Air Force and did a lot of work in the Rhodesian Air Force. And then
On the engineering side.
I'm very much on the engineering side.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because you said aeronautics
Yeah,
engineering.
that's right.
Yeah.
And of course, they discovered that I could program computers as a result of that. So I kind of got transferred to a multi-forces software development team, and so did a lot of work with the police and the army and other companies as required, as it were.
How come you could program computers?
I was taught at university. Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fortran, Algol.
Yes.
Okay. It's probably taking a few people back a little while. Yeah, but it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yes.
And then a lovely lady who I'd worked with in Rhodesia Railways went down to South Africa, and she came up and asked me to join her down there. And we were to form a new unit, which was basically based on financial modelling for this group. And the group was called the Rennies Group at that stage. Now, they were a big logistics and services-based group at that stage. They had hotels, interests in hotels, and a lot of other service-based companies. And I started as a financial modelling analyst with them, and continued. That was very much technical development. But then I did an MBA, and at the University of the Witwatersrand, and then moved across to commercial software. And I literally came up through the ranks: development analyst, project manager, and then was offered the position of not CIO but IS manager of Holiday Inns Southern Africa. And that then developed, and I spent a number of years with Holiday Inns Southern Africa, and then I was asked to come back to the center of the group, and I became responsible for all their big central systems running on mainframes mainly, and those were mainly the financial systems. So I did a period of time looking after all those systems, and I got a lot of operational experience, quite apart from software development. But at the same time, I had still retained an interest in, I guess, what most people call decision science or business analytics and MIS type operations and development. And
Decision science, to make
Yeah.
decisions?
yeah, because of course my operational research background is
Right.
very much orientated at that. Business analytics.
So
as
one
they
thing
call
I
it
have,
now.
these days Agile is very popular,
Yes.
right? It's everywhere, everybody's talking about it. Now, for me, when you do any kind of project management, whatever you call it, the decision process seems to be a central piece, like how to make decisions.
Yes.
Now, when I look at Agile, I don't see any strong way, a method, a tool to help you make decisions. It's more like, if you're doing some Scrum or something, like a product owner,
Yeah.
they will sort of make the decision.
Yeah.
But there's no decision-making process or method or, anything.
No, that's absolutely right, Kai. And in fact, can we come back to that? Because
Yeah.
it is a really fundamental reason why I went back to school, as it were, to learn and understand Agile, because I detected the same problem. Right. But perhaps I can just
Yeah.
finish the
Yes,
story a little
yes.
bit.
Go.
Because what happened subsequently was I became a divisional CIO within the Rennies Group, and then I became the group CIO. So we had about 45 companies. It depended. It was over a fair period of time, and it kind of fluctuated because we bought and sold lots of different companies, and the group changed form, and it became very much a logistics and financial services group. And that was predominantly whilst I was there, not only as a divisional CIO, but also fundamentally at a group CIO level. So I'd overseen a lot of transformational work, quite apart from mergers and acquisitions work at that senior level. And that was fun. There were a lot of challenges in that environment, particularly taking lots of systems and technologies from different companies, particularly those that we'd acquired, and actually sort of bringing them together with some sort of coherence and cohesiveness so that the group could interoperate between companies, not just act as a collection of independent companies.
Right.
Yeah.
Always a challenge.
That is indeed, absolutely.
Yeah.
We can come back and you can ask me a few questions about that experience. I'd be
Let me
happy
ask
to
you.
answer them, but
First, do you want to? Yeah.
But subsequently, after that, just to set the picture, I'd done about 8 years at the top position, and my son had left junior school and was just about to go to secondary school, and my wife is English, and I decided that it would be very nice if he could actually go to a UK-based secondary school, and we were very lucky to get him into one of the top schools here in the UK. And I took the decision to not semi-retire, but to sort of have almost a change of career. And I'd realized at that stage, because Agile, I never grew up with Agile. It was something that was being imposed on me when I was actually at the group CI level. And we played around with it, and we had a lot of success and a lot of failures too. But I had appreciated that, in fact, I had a big gap in my own education on the art of the possible with Agile approaches.
The art of the possible.
Yes.
Nice.
Okay, all right. And I came across to the UK, back to the UK, and I did the usual sort of consultancy and working with big companies, particularly in terms of their technology strategies. But after a while, I actually took the decision to go back to school, as it were, and started working with a company called Energize Work, who are very, very adept at agile technologies. They've been through it several times and at the other end, and they actually know exactly what the limitations of agile were and how best to exploit it. And they were a very, very good company to work with. But one of the problems that I had experienced was I felt that those people who were introducing Agile had wanted to take a revolutionary approach to the development of software. And that was admirable for a number of reasons. But I felt that what had happened is that they'd actually chucked out the baby with the bathwater, as it were, when they took this revolutionary approach. In other words, they didn't learn the lessons of the previous 30 to 40 years about what had worked and what didn't work. And there were a lot of extraordinarily valuable techniques and solutions that had been developed in those previous 3 years. And in fact, over the last 5 years that I've actually been working with Energize Work, one of the things that we've done was to actually take a critical look at Agile and to work out how that in fact we can incorporate some of those older best practices and incorporate them into the Agile approach. And in fact, one of the big problems, particularly when you're actually working in large-scale change situations, large systems development, and Energize Work did a lot of very big systems, internationally based systems. So we weren't manufacturing systems on a small scale, we were actually developing on a large scale. And under those circumstances, you can't really get a development team to be both the project manager working with a product owner and the business analysts, and not only working at the logical level, but and the physical level, and basically working with the testers all in one go. All right. The problem is the scale. And as a result, we had to actually work out how we could introduce working with project managers, not necessarily from a waterfall type perspective although I can talk to you at length about Prince 2 if you would like me to. There are a lot of problems with Prince 2, but it has a jewel in its crown.
Right.
There's probably only one, and that's the product-based planning. But that's extraordinarily valuable at further down. But also the concept of a product owner, which is one that I like, because that's basically a champion for development. But when you're operating at scale, you quite often find that you have more than one product owner. And it's how do you actually break down the structure of the system to accommodate that management environment, and then work at the logical level, introducing now business analysts and getting a natural handover to developers who might have done quite a lot of business analysis themselves, but are probably more better positioned to do not the logical model, but the physical model for the system that need to be developed, and the real technology, the hardcore software engineering is what I call it, and then interfacing with the testers in particular to develop the system. But at the same time, when you're working with large companies, you've also got those architects. And I know the Gilb philosophy on architecture. I don't quite share it. And I do believe that those architects actually do play a valuable role because they provide that cohesion and coherence within a large environment.
What is an architect here for you? Can you sort of define their role or their job?
Yeah, they're basically custodians of the overall technological architecture, quite apart from the functional and data architecture within the organization. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can't afford to ignore the standards and the principles that need to be embedded in a large organization in order to get that coherence and coordination. But at the same time, you don't want too much, because you want to actually allow a reasonable amount of freedom to act and flexibility at a more physical level. And so there's a big balance to be achieved here. And in essence, what we've done is we've actually worked out what is a great way to incorporate, particularly for large-scale projects, project managers, product owners, business analysts, developers, testers, and architects, and then, of course, the delivery back up the scale, right from not only your unit testing and your integration testing, but your operational acceptance testing once you've done user acceptance testing and handing over to big operations. Mm-hmm. When you're working with banks, for example, you do have to be particularly sensitive to the types of changes that you're making and the impact of those changes on the existing infrastructure. Because you can do an awful lot of damage if you actually make some mistakes and either forget something or impose something that the rest of the organization is not expecting. Right. So you do need that rigor, and you need that level of professionalism that is at the development team level in order to operate at scale. So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing, and that's why I said I had to go back to school to learn all of this.
Right.
I've got a lot of training and a lot of experience, but really not in this new agile and lean environment. So that's basically.
So where did you school yourself in that? You went back to school, meaning you studied books?
No. Well, I did. I actually attended Gilb courses, for example.
Yes, I know that. Right, that one I know.
And I must say,
it's been very active, coming again and again to Gilb courses.
Yeah.
Right?
So I met Tom and yourself. It must be about 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And what Tom was explaining seemed to make an awful lot of sense. And it also fitted in with quite a lot of not only what I'd learnt about Agile at that stage, but also my experience about Agile. And a lot of the techniques that Tom was talking about resonated with me and what I wanted to achieve. So I've basically adopted, in large measure, all the principles and techniques embodied in the competitive engineering approach, particularly from an EVO project management perspective. And I find that it works well. And I can also work with a number of different types of organizations, those that are still sort of got a heavy legacy environment towards predictability, controlling change and all the rest of it. And you get a lot of large organizations that are still committed to this, particularly in the government environment. Right. And so they still work with a waterfall philosophy. But you can actually, underneath, use that as an envelope, and you can actually build in a much more flexible and agile approach underneath that sort of infrastructure. But at the same time, if you're actually working with a newer and a more flexible organization that has grown up with the new technologies, then Evo is a wonderful way from a project perspective to manage those projects, to allow that flexibility and to allow that rapid iteration, and also learning.
Yeah.
Okay, that
Learning
feedback loop, so that you can actually make sure that you pivot on a more or less optimal manner as you go through a particular project. That's also been a great benefit to me from adopting the competitive engineering principles. And I think maybe our listeners don't appreciate it, but you certainly will. Impact estimation tables form a very, very big part of my life.
Right.
On just about all sorts of, just about all projects that I do.
Right.
And I don't necessarily only do software development projects. I'm often involved in higher levels of change, particularly at the program level.
Yes.
And impact estimation tables is great.
Yes.
I like to think of impact estimation as the poor man's linear programming. Yeah, but most of us are poor men in this particular case, because linear programming requires an awful lot of information in order to be effective.
I've seen some of your tables. They tend to be rather large.
Yeah, some of them are. Some of them are quite simple, actually.
Yes. I just remember one or two that
yeah.
was just, it's like, whoa. And you add some of your own elements in there. It's really nice.
Oh, yes.
I really enjoy seeing what you do with that.
Yeah. But also
impact. We also got value decision tables, impact estimation.
Yes,
it's the same thing.
Right, yes. Yeah.
Excellent.
And in fact,
that's part also of coming back to decision making. Right?
Yes.
So that's one of the tools, I'm assuming.
Yes.
For decision making.
Yeah. But in terms of decision making,
yes.
I've kind of known this for a long time, but I had to revisit this, and it's become really important now for me in all the projects that I manage to make sure that the development matches what is happening in an operational context, especially from a workflow perspective.
Okay.
All right.
Go
Now,
a little deeper there.
The reason why I'd say that is because workflows are how businesses operate. And if you've got a system that works in almost a counterintuitive way to that workflow, it's very, very difficult for that system to embed itself successfully within the operating environment. And workflows are predicated by processes with decision points. All right.
Right.
And those processes in between the decision points are often translated into digital services. Okay. And so in order to get a natural structure within systems, okay, you need to be very sensitive to those decision points so that you can actually build a system that matches the operations environment. And in fact, the starting point here is the traditional customer journey. Well, it's become traditional now. Okay, because that actually allows you then to structure everything else underneath that, particularly in terms of digital services. And that has become a really important part of a lot of the work that we do, and in particular how I actually apply the competitive engineering techniques subsequently. Okay, so those decision points are pretty key.
Yes. And I've seen also that you work when you transform, you help transform some large companies, right? I've seen, and then this workflow seems to be something you're very much focusing on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
in actual fact, typically in a project, you will have anything up to a dozen different workflows that you have to address in order to be able to provide a comprehensive system.
Right.
By the way, system here might be many computer systems and many services.
Exactly.
Okay,
so because a lot of people develop a product, but you typically, well, I don't know what you typically do, but I've seen work you've done where you're working on transforming a whole company with many products, services, development teams, and you go in and look at the different workflows.
Yes.
If I remember right.
Yes, and quite frequently they cut across functions
right.
Within the organization. So it's really important to be able to identify the overall impact on the company of a new system, particularly if you're doing large-scale systems as we are.
Right.
Okay. The smaller systems can be contained quite often within a function. The larger systems tend to cut across functions.
Now, just for fun,
yes.
I mean, most of us, we do mistakes, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Because we do a little bit risky things
yes.
to push. And maybe we even learn something from our mistakes. And,
yes.
you being a little bit older than most people in the industry now. You must
have
made
a lot more mistakes than
you must have
people.
made, and maybe sometimes it's hard to remember because we like to we have selective memories, right?
Yes, yes.
But can you try to think of a big mistake you did? Let's call it in life. It might be in the project, product, the management, or in life.
Okay.
You know, get real here, because we all like to talk about all the good stuff, but
Yes.
I know, and you know, that mistakes are part of it.
Well, it's interesting because you do get these big decision points in your life. All right. And one of them was, whilst I was the group CIO for this group, is I got approached by a company to become their chief executive. All right. And
From another company.
From another company,
Yeah.
completely different company. Yeah. And I decided actually I would stay within the IT environment. But I often wonder what would have happened if I'd actually taken the decision to do that. Because it would have taken me on a completely different course.
Yes.
And now I think I'm not sure whether it was a mistake or not, but I've had some ups and downs, like we all have.
Yes.
All right. And I wonder if maybe that was one of the bigger mistakes I made.
Now,
it would have taken me on a completely different course.
Right. So now you don't know. It wasn't a mistake where like it hurt afterwards. It was just like, what if? Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe not that much of a learning point, but maybe like, what did you learn from that? Like, did your gut feeling say you should go with it, and maybe some fear held you back, and you learned that you should go with your gut feeling, or what? Did you learn something from that?
I think
that we all can learn from.
Yeah. Maybe we should contain this to the IT environment, because I work with lots of other functions as well.
Yes, yeah.
All right. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made was when I was operating as a group CIO. I introduced a big transformation program for the group, and it was essential that we did do it. And we effectively downsized from the mainframe that we'd taken and introduced a whole lot of local area networks and microcomputers, not microcomputers, mini computers, now known as mid-range machines. And I hadn't appreciated at that stage how important the wide area network was. And we actually focused too much on the systems and the operations of those systems within particular companies, and we're talking about multiple companies here, without focusing on the wide area network sufficiently fast. And in fact, we committed to an old technology in the wide area network, and about 2 years later we'd actually realized our mistake and we actually switched. All right. But at that stage, the technology had now developed to the point where we could see that local area networks were really going to dominate. And all future systems development was going to be based on local area network type systems rather than mid-range computers. Mm. Okay. So I think the decision to downsize from the mainframe was correct, but we didn't do it far enough, and we didn't focus on the intercommunication problems between those fragmented systems now. And I think that it was part of the learning curve that I think everybody was going through at that time. It just happens that we had the biggest wide area network in Southern Africa at the time. So the ramifications of that were pretty significant.
And how do we, so you know, that's probably happening right now, right? So that was then.
Yes.
Now there's new decisions that needs to be made towards moving towards new technology.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do we prevent making that mistake that you did if we were to make, you know, a situation similar to that, a decision today? How do we make that good decision?
Okay, well, part of the problem that we've got today is that the technology is changing at an enormous rate.
Right.
Okay, so one of the functions that I would like to establish in every IT operation that I work with is some ability to perform technology scanning. And scanning. So actually looking at all the technologies that you've got, and looking at all the related technologies that are happening in the world across the board. And to have an innovation capability where you're constantly trying out new technologies, all right?
Right.
And working out what the impact is of this new technology on your environment, right, and the future of your environment. And for us, it's not only hardware and indeed in software, but it's also in the structure of the whole IT environment.
Right.
Okay. So we're starting to see, I think, in large measure, basically a reintroduction of some of the old architecture principles that we have to put back in place, that have probably been discarded for the last decade in particular, that actually now start to focus on how do you bring things together, having fractured them, particularly with the use of agile and lean and all the rest of it.
Right.
How do you bring things together on a controlled and a coherent basis? And I'm seeing that quite a lot of the new technologies are now focusing not so much on how do you become efficient and effective, but how do you actually interoperate, and how do you communicate, and how do you actually now provide the infrastructure for people to work at scale together.
Right.
Okay, and to achieve bigger objectives.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, so if you were to, if you establish scanning technology, as you said, what I'm understanding then is it's not like once in a while, like once every 5-10 years, you go check out new technology.
No.
You are constantly
doing it,
constantly learning what's out there,
yes,
relative to your own technologies, and how to and when to make the movements.
And if I can contrast it to the way we used to do it, now with that whole agile approach, it's a much more acceptable way to do this, because you're doing things in small units, and the financial impact on that is much less.
Right.
Whereas previously, you probably took a much larger project to go and evaluate something with a huge financial impact.
Right.
Now you can do it at a micro level.
Right. So
and then you can start
using
to bring it all together.
the EVO, the value decision,
Exactly.
doing things in short cycles.
Yeah.
And
by the way, we use impact estimation tables there too.
Of course. I know. Yeah, those are really powerful. Okay, now if what advice would you give to young people starting out in software or outside software engineering, product development, management? I know it's wide. I went a little wide
yes,
there, but just what should they study? What should they, where should they go? Right. So right now, of course, agile techniques, like
yes,
they're being sold to them, right? Become a product owner, a scrum master, or some other whatever happens to be
yes,
heavily sold. So they're going to get those opportunities for sure,
yes,
to learn those things. So we need a different impact, different
yes,
angle.
Okay,
so what should they do? For instance, I know.
Yeah, I deal a lot with software development teams, and it's a wonderful environment, and it's great because you get instant feedback on your work and all the rest of it. So it's a very rewarding environment in which to work. When you get outside that environment, you have to take into account a lot of other organizational issues. Okay, so what are the different functions within an organization? What makes everything work at the next level up? Okay, and I think, quite frankly, the whole systems analysis, business analysis, project management, product owner type environment is a very natural next step for people who have maybe grown up purely in the software development environment. And in fact, if they're going to become effective in business, they need to have a more broad understanding of the way that businesses operate. Okay, now, I'm not asking them to go and get an MBA.
No.
All right, but when I was working at the group level, one of the things that I did, which was actually very effective, was I took a lot of the systems analysts that we'd had, and they were quite often analyst developers, so they were doing analysis and development, and gave them some business analysis training. And then the next step was to actually introduce them to a program that I actually developed as part of my relationship with the Wits Business School, which was to actually do a mini MBA.
Right.
Okay, and that was a wonderful new development path. Okay, for a lot of people who wanted to aspire to maybe getting to a CIO or a more senior management position.
Okay. Now, if somebody would want to do specifically that,
yes,
right, where would they go? Does that exist now? Is that an offer?
Well, in actual fact, there's an enormous amount on the internet,
right,
in this area. If you wanted to do a lot of your research on your internet, but quite frankly,
do you have one specific, one place you would recommend, or just?
I don't have a specific place to recommend, but there are a lot of universities, and there used to be in the UK technical colleges. That they're no longer those, but they're re-emerging, and quite a lot of companies now offer programs, more sort of like apprenticeship programs, but apprenticeship for professionals, as it were.
Right.
Okay, and your companies actually quite often will sponsor people to actually go on courses like this. Excellent. At the local institutions. Right. And I would encourage people to actually, if they wanted to move in that direction, to speak to their companies and ask them if they can actually get some help and some mentorship in developing to the next level.
Excellent. Okay. Now, thank you. Now, very last,
yes.
Energize Work.
Yes.
How do people get in contact with you and Energize Work and the great work you do there? We need to promote Energize Work. It's a lot of good work.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, it looks as though Energize Work's going to be transformed itself, and we may emerge as a different company. Largely because of a lot of the lessons that we've learned, and anybody can contact myself through yourself.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to do it, and I'd be very happy to respond to people who approach you in that way.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And all the best. Thank you.